Good morning, I'm Richard Gage, AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I represent 2,200 architects and engineers who are demanding a real investigation of what happened here at Ground Zero in New York. We're here today on September 11th to commemorate the 13th anniversary of what happened on 9/11, the catastrophic destruction of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers, and to tell the truth about that event to the American people, because they have not received the truth. They have not received the evidence. That's why they are demanding a real investigation, and we'll be talking about that evidence here today. There are very, very serious problems with the official story of 9/11, which has become the official myth. To that end, I want to make several announcements today, including the New York premiere of the new film, Anatomy of a Great Deception, premiering here in New York at Theater 80 in the East Village at 2 p.m. September 11th today. Asking all of you to be there, to bring your friends, because this is a story of one man's journey into the nightmare of 9/11 and the evidence that he did not hear from his friends, his family, his wife, who thought he was nuts in trying to bring this story to their attention. Finally, he had to make a film where he connected the dots for them in a very easy, palatable narrative that weaves together the evidence from our DVD, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out, which includes 43 technical experts in their fields, high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all giving out the evidence that is not picked up in the mainstream media. So, this film is extraordinarily important. The DVD will be available within days. We're asking all of you to pick it up and get it to those people who think you are crazy or who won't listen to you. Next, we're announcing the massive 89-foot wrap around the corner digital billboard here in Times Square here in New York. This video billboard, for the first time in New York history, shows Building 7 directly to the American people, so they can see how the building came down at free fall acceleration, as fast as a bowling ball falling off the side of the building. This building was destroyed the afternoon of 9/11, not having been hit by an airplane. Nevertheless, falls symmetrically, suddenly, straight down into its own footprint, in the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. What does our government tell us about this unprecedented, catastrophic destruction, the third worst structural failure in modern history? They tell us it came down by normal office fires. No office fire has ever brought down any skyscraper in the history of skyscrapers. 100 years of skyscraper history with hundreds of fires, much larger, longer lasting, and hotter than those in Building 7. And the ones in Building 7, which were few and scattered and small, were out. They burned out over an hour before the building came down. So they could not have been responsible at all for the catastrophic destruction that we saw. So we expose this evidence to the American people and to the press today so that they can understand that there are serious questions, not just with Building 7, but with the entire story of 9/11, including and foremost the catastrophic explosive destruction of the Twin Towers. So, this billboard highlights the question. It points out, is this a controlled demolition? Rethink 9/11. The evidence might surprise you. So we're looking for lots of feedback from New Yorkers who are shocked to see that a third tower in their own building, easily the tallest building in 33 of our states, came down and they didn't even know about it. The media has censored this. The media has censored the evidence for the Twin Towers as well, including the laterally, freely flying 4-ton structural steel sections landing 600 feet in every direction, ejected at 60 miles per hour, clocked by physicists. The 90,000 tons of concrete pulverized in midair, not down at the bottom. We don't see a pile of 110 floors at the bottom of either Twin Tower. What do we see? A 2-story pile of core columns, perimeter columns, etc. We see pools of molten iron. It takes 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit to melt iron. We see, and officials document, hot temperature corrosion attack on the steel. Molten iron invading the steel beams. The FEMA report, Appendix C, author Jonathan Barnett says the ends of the beams were evaporated. But what happens to this Appendix C from the 2002 FEMA report? It is thrown out when NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, comes in to take over the investigation. The forensic evidence wiped out. The destruction of evidence, illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, wiped out. 99% of the steel recycled to China before investigators could look at it with a real forensic investigation. This is absolutely extraordinary and of course unprecedented. But how do they get away with it? It's an act of war as opposed to declared a crime. The crime of the century has been covered up, and the American people deserve to know the truth about it. We've got to get the truth out to the American people, as we did on C-SPAN, August 1st, 40 minutes. All of this evidence went to 3 million Americans, as it did with Coast to Coast AM radio with George Norrie, Alex Jones, and the other night, Jesse Ventura. We're reaching millions and millions of Americans. They're going to know the truth. And when enough of them do, they're going to demand a real investigation and throw out any and all elected representatives who will not support and demand themselves a real investigation. That is why we're also appearing at Theater 80 on September 11th in 2 days for a symposium. The 9/11 Awakening Goes Mainstream, a truth-inspired symposium with Mark Crispin Miller, who's come out in favor of a real investigation. Wayne Mattson, former NSA analyst, who is exposing why this subject will not be covered in the mainstream media. What are the problems with the official story? 9/11 survivors and family members, firefighters like Rudy Dent, who was on the pile, who saw the evidence for the explosive demolition of these towers and is now speaking out about it. Lori Van Auken will be here, family member, Jersey girl, lost her husband in the tower, demanding a real investigation. Catherine Montano, who lost her son in the tower. Bob McIlvaine, who lost his son Bobby in the tower. They will be there at the symposium September 13th, 2 p.m. So we're encouraging you to be there also. We're also encouraging you to download for free the flyers, which are the alternative guide to the 9/11 Museum, right here, where we are awakening tourists from all over the world here at Ground Zero to what they will not see in the museum this year or any year until enough of us are educating enough Americans. What won't they see in the museum? The evidence for the explosive destruction of the Twin Towers in Building 7. The rapid free-fall descent of World Trade Center 7. The evidence of nanothermite, a high-tech incendiary found in all the World Trade Center dust samples by a small team of international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, who has documented in a 25-page peer-reviewed paper the evidence of super thermite and incendiary used by the military for extraordinary purposes. Regular thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. There are patented cutter charges that use thermite much more effectively than high-energy explosives like C4 and RDX. But these, of course, would lead a loud bang as a signature, a bright flash as a signature. In a deceptive controlled demolition like the Twin Towers, they might not want to use such measures. Thus, the evidence for thermite in all the World Trade Center dust, composed of small iron microspheres, previously molten iron microspheres, the diameter of a human hair, found in all the World Trade Center dust samples by the USGS, by R.J. Lee, in their official documentation of the contents of that dust. Up to 6% of the dust is composed of these spheres which have no other cause for being other than thermite. So, this missing evidence is not only in the alternative guide to the museum, but also in the brand new virtual walking tour, which we're announcing today as well. This walking tour, created by Barbara Honegger and Bonnie Faulkner, with introduction by Bob McIlvaine, family member, 9/11 family member, is a walk, a 2-hour walk through the museum with what really happened tied to each physical piece of evidence there, the truth about it, so that museum goers will not be deceived by the narrative that they find in the museum. A 2-hour walking tour on YouTube. So go to youtube.com and search 9/11 Museum Virtual Walking Tour. It's an extraordinary piece of work, brand new, announcing today. Are there any questions?
I asked you this earlier, but the Anatomy of a Great Deception has been described as the ultimate red pill. What's so good about this film?
Anatomy of a Great Deception is described as the ultimate red pill. Why? Because it eliminates the defenses that most of us have in being confronted with this material. Because here's a guy, a normal business guy, who, upon seeing the evidence from our DVD, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, tries to explain it to other people and they think he's nuts. Well, he had to make a film so he could walk them through the narrative personally, tying the dots together in a way that undermines the natural human defenses against this foreign material to our worldview. We're not adept at questioning our government, unfortunately, or its story about 9/11, which provided many of us a great deal of comfort to answer the questions about how these towers came down, how the hijackers penetrated our defenses, how the drills put up the morning of 9/11 put false blips on the air traffic controllers' screens to confuse them about the hijackers, about why half a dozen of the hijackers appeared in the following months on BBC, London Guardian, and said, hey, I'm a hijacker, that's my picture, that's my birthday, but I mean, I'm not a hijacker, but that's me calling me a hijacker. So we've got to have an investigation that answers all of these unanswered questions. The architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth don't know who's responsible for the perpetration of the explosive destruction of these towers. What we do know is that if enterprising journalists and criminal investigators will look at who benefited, classic questions. Who benefited from the destruction of towers and the aftermath? Who benefited from the massive expenditure in arms, oil, banking, which promoted these wars along with the media, and investigating into those industries and people who had access to the towers. Ace Elevator having access to the core columns and beams in the elevator the 9 months, the Twin Towers elevator, the 9 months prior to 9/11. They should be asked, well, why were you out of business after 9/11? Why this was your only major contract? Why did you come from nowhere to take this contract from Otis Elevator, who had the maintenance contract prior to that for the Twin Towers? Real questions not being asked. Who ran security in the World Trade Center complex until the day of 9/11 when their contract was to end? Real questions. Who's on the board of directors of Securicom, Stratesec, which also had the security for the two airports where the two airplanes came from that morning? Real questions can get to the answer of who brought these towers down. Yes?
Richard, when people call you a conspiracy theorist, do you explain that physics is not a conspiracy?
There have been a number of labels brought upon the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, including, well, you're just a bunch of conspiracy theorists. Well, we're asking you to rethink 9/11, not based on conspiracy theory, which we do not have, but based on the scientific forensic evidence. We're calling for the truth to be told, and we believe that truth is good for America. Why? Because it stops wars of aggression. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a truth that will end wars and restore our national economy, devastated by the $4.5 trillion global war on terror, which goes back to what? 9/11. Which the heart of which, at its iconic core, is the destruction of these towers right here in Ground Zero. We believe the truth about 9/11 will terminate the NSA's unconstitutional policy of global spying, which Americans have turned over and allowed to happen because they don't connect the dots. It all goes back to 9/11. We must restore our civil liberties, which have been legislated away with actions such as the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, in which any of us can be arrested and not told what we're arrested with, not charged. We can be held indefinitely, no right to a lawyer, no right to a trial. We can be assassinated, tortured. That's today, here in America, legal, because we didn't stand up for our civil liberties. We allowed our legislators to trade them in for security. Let me tell you, that's a bad deal. We also want to restore our country's moral foundation and our faith in our government. We can do that with the truth about 9/11. That's why we believe 9/11 is good for America. Yes?
There was an article about Zim Industries that had space in one of the World Trade Centers that had it's actually called Zim Industries had prior foreknowledge of 9/11.
Zim is a moving company, I believe, which was a tenant in the Trade Center towers, which moved out of the towers a week prior to 9/11. And so you had a question about Zim. What's the question?
that they had a lease space for another 4 years.
What's the question?
Why did they?
I don't know why Zim moved out, but if they had foreknowledge of this building's unprecedented destruction, again, no fire has brought down any skyscraper in the history of very hot, large, and long-lasting fires, over 100 of them. But Mayor Giuliani had foreknowledge that the towers were coming down. We'd like to know who told him. Mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion behind them, looking straight into the CNN camera, saying, "Did you hear that? That building's coming down. The building's going to blow up. Flame and debris coming down." Actually said that. What fire has ever blown up a whole building, shattering it, one structural element from another, top to bottom, in under 7 seconds? In the case of the World Trade Center 7, and in the Twin Towers, under 12 seconds each, completely shattered. Fire can't do that. Next question.
And some of the prominent members of our government, retired or current, that have agreed with us.
Oh, yes. There's been a number of whistleblowers, and we don't know how many whistleblowers have come forward that we don't know about. We've been blowing the whistle for 8 years now 2,200 architects and engineers, but we haven't gotten much airtime on mainstream media. Neither has William Binney, who last week signed our petition calling for a real investigation of these 3 towers. William Binney is a famous NSA analyst, whistleblower, who has come forward to stand side by side with AE 9/11 Truth in demanding a real investigation. He's been at it personally since 2001, and he has received a lot of trouble from the FBI for his heroic, patriotic effort to expose the truth about what's really going on at the NSA, just as we're exposing the truth about what really happened here at Ground Zero. Next question.
Who sponsored the ad on the Times Square billboard, and how can people help with the advertising?
We have a $500,000 effort supported by AE 9/11 Truth donors who see the vision of what has to happen in order to wake up the American people. So in 12 international cities last year, billboards all across the world. We've extended that program here in Times Square with this massive billboard, 89 feet high, 40 feet wide, right at the mouth going into the Lincoln Tunnel, and right next to the massive bus station, bringing people into Manhattan. This is an extraordinary project, costs thousands of dollars to purchase valuable video space, 89 feet, 40 feet tall. It's supporters from AE 9/11 Truth and the 9/11 Truth movement across the board that made this possible. And so people can donate to this cause at rethink911.org. The evidence might surprise you, so contribute and help it surprise the rest of the New Yorkers. Next question. Yes.
There's been talk about molten steel at buildings 1 and buildings 2. Talk about if there's evidence, or does anybody talk about buildings 3, 4, 5? Those buildings have including buildings 7.
There's massive, overwhelming evidence for extremely hot temperatures associated with the World Trade Center Towers 1 and 2. Molten iron pouring out of the tower 10 minutes prior to its collapse. The World Trade Center structural engineer, Leslie Robertson himself, calling for, saying that there's a little river of molten steel. Molten iron droplets found in all the World Trade Center dust. Molten iron has been seen and documented at World Trade Center 6 as well. Building 6 had a massive crater created by explosions, which many people documented were actually exploded prior to the tower's collapse. So we're also looking for an investigation, of course, of Building 6 as well. Next question, over here, Vlad.
Could you please explain again, if you haven't already, the significance that the government has admitted that Building 7 is collapsing at acceleration due to gravity for at least 2 seconds?
The question is, what does the U.S. government, in the form of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, say about the collapse of Building 7? Well, they were embarrassed publicly at their press conference before their draft report came out, or after their draft report came out, into admitting that the building did, after all, come down at free fall acceleration. Well, they do not admit the implications of that, which are that all 80 columns had to have been removed at once on at least 8 floors, because that's the distance over which this building fell at free fall acceleration.